Welcome to the Desert Sanctuary with Karl and Paula Forehand.
Often when we have doubts about religion, or we want to be contemplative, or simply ask questions, it can feel like we are wandering out into the desert.
We would like to welcome you to our sanctuary, the Desert Sanctuary.
We've tried to pick guests that resonate with our fellow friends and seekers here in the desert.
Our hope is that you will find life for your body, soul, and spirit.
And now, here is our show. Hi, welcome to the Desert Sanctuary podcast. I'm Paula Forehand. I'm here with Karl Forehand, and we have another fantastic guest that we're going to get to. Before we do that, do you have anything you need to share with the listening audience?
No, I don't think so. Every time I try to promote the YouTube channel, it just goes downhill. We have less after I promote it. So we're just really happy that people tune in and listen to the show, and we get feedback from that. Our new book is coming out in about a month.
Yeah.
So
yes, because we're doing this in July. So,
but this won't be released till after that. So
then it'll already be out.
It doesn't matter.
It'll be old news by then. Yeah.
We're here to talk to Paula today.
Yeah, exactly. So Paula Stone Williams is an internationally known speaker on issues of gender equality, LGBTQ advocacy, and religious tolerance. She has been featured in TEDWomen, TEDSummit, the New York Times, Red Table Talk, TEDxMileHigh, The Washington Post, NPR, Good Morning America, CNN, ABC News, PBS, and scores of other media outlets. As a keynote speaker, Paula has spoken for hundreds of corporations, conferences, and universities around the world. Her TED Talks have had over 9 million views. Paula's memoir, As a Woman, What I Learned About Power, Sex, and the Patriarchy After I Transitioned, was published by Simon Schuster in 2021. Welcome to the podcast, Paula. We are really excited. We were talking before we even pressed record how excited we are to have you on the podcast. So thank you for being with us tonight.
It's good to be with you. I'm looking forward to our time.
Thank you.
Yeah. Paula, we've done about 280 episodes of this podcast, and we've listened to stories from people. A lot of them were hurt by religion. Some of them were just questioning their faith and so on. But we've heard a lot of stories, and we consider that an honor to be able to hear people's stories. And we try to make it a practice of creating a safe space, and also that we believe people's stories when they tell them to us. And so we count this an honor. And when I sent you the message after we saw you at the Wild Goose, I was hopeful, but not positive that you're even going to respond. So I'm glad that you're here. We're glad to hear your story. But if we could start off that way, just tell us kind of your story in a nutshell, and we'll go from there. We have lots. We will have lots of questions. We didn't write any of them down, so here we go.
That's just fine. Yeah, I was born into a fundamentalist family. My father was an independent Christian church pastor. My mother was even more theologically conservative than my father. I was raised in that world. My uncle was the president of a Christian college. Another uncle worked at a Christian college. My father was on the board of that same college. And so it was pretty much destined that my brother and I would both go there. Shortly after finishing seminary, I ended up beginning working with a church planting organization that was just a mom and pop operation on Long Island. And by the time I left 35 years later, we were one of the largest church planting organizations in the United States. And we worked all over the US, Northern Europe, Northern Asia. We started churches that tended to grow very large, very fast. And I also was the editor at large of a national magazine. It was the weekly magazine of my denomination. It had been published every week since 1866, whether it should have been or not. And I wrote a weekly column for that. I helped choose the writers, edited the articles. I also was on the preaching team of 2 mega churches, one here in Colorado, where I live now, and one in the Philadelphia, Pennsylvania area. I was in New York for the 35 years that I worked with the church planting organization. So when I came out as transgender, I promptly lost every single one of my jobs. In all 50 states of the US, you can't be fired for being transgender. But of course, in all 50, you can't be fired if you're transgender and you work for a religious corporation. And so I was gone within 24 hours. I had never had a bad review. I had never had any kind of difficulty at all. And I was not at that point even sure I was going to transition, but just coming out as someone who identified as transgender was enough to get me fired. I lost my pension, which was worth about $1 million. And I had loaned the ministry about $500,000 of my own money, and they were refusing to give that back. So I had to threaten a lawsuit to get that back. And it was a good thing I did get about 80% of it back, because I did not really work for the next 4 years. I earned $23,000 in 48 months, so less than $6,000 a year. So it was really a very difficult time throughout that period. My doctorate is in pastoral counseling, and so I was able to continue with a small counseling practice, but not enough to sustain myself at all. And things were not pleasant in that first couple of years. But then I came back into the church, began preaching for a post-evangelical church in the Denver area, Highlands Community Church, began working also with Denver Community Church, another post-evangelical church, larger, about 1,500 people in the greater Denver area. Both of those churches then combined to start a church, Envision Community Church, here in Boulder County, Colorado. So I was one of the founding pastors of that church. It's now 5 years of age. My main work, though, is not so much that. I do a lot of different things, but my main source of income is speaking around the world on issues related to gender equity. I actually don't speak on trans issues all that often. Most commonly, I speak on gender equity issues. And I also continue a practice as a psychotherapist. I work now primarily with C-suite people who are at the top level of corporations. I also was voted into office here in Boulder County and serve in the city council of the town that I live in. And then I'm a coach for TED, and also a coach for the largest TEDx in North America. So I'm actually a speaker's ambassador for TED, which is kind of coaching light. And then I'm a coach for TEDxMileHigh, which is one of the largest in the world, the largest in North America. So I devote a lot of my time to working with TED speakers, preparing them for the TED stage, helping to curate who's going to be speaking for a TED event. So I get to do lots of different things and find my life to be pretty enjoyable at this point.
Yeah, it's so good.
Yeah.
I have this little catchphrase that I say at the end of stuff. I always say, be where you are, be who you are, and be at peace. Those first two things, presence, being where you are, and authenticity, being who you are, in my deconstruction and my kind of life journey here, presence and authenticity have been so important to me. And I heard one of your talks about authenticity. It was really good. How important is that to you, and what does that mean to you?
Yeah. Every TED Talk has to be memorized, and I've been memorizing sermons for 50 years, so that didn't seem like it was going to be much of an issue. That particular talk has had almost 7 million views. But I kept having trouble with one transition that I just was losing. And even the day before in dress rehearsal, I lost it. And my coach, who's also the main coach for TED, said, I think you're missing a transition sentence. I think that's why we keep losing that one. And I find that true as I coach TED speakers as well. When they keep getting stuck in the same place, there usually is something else that needs to be said between those two ideas. And so we thought about what it might be, couldn't figure it out. And then lying in bed that night, it struck me. I knew what the line was. I put it into the talk. It ended up being the most quoted line from the talk. And it is, in fact, the dedication page of my book. And the line is, the call toward authenticity is sacred and holy and for the greater good. And so the language is carefully chosen, the call toward authenticity. I don't know that we ever become authentic. I think we're always on a journey of attempted authenticity, because all of us will lie to ourselves if in no other situation or circumstance, it's difficult for us to sustain a life of raw honesty. But I think it is the pursuit. The call toward authenticity is sacred and holy and for the greater good. I think if we don't, as individuals, take on that call, we are in fact not fulfilling the purpose for which we are here on this earth. And we're not doing our part to leave the world a better place than the way we found it.
So for you, what has been something that's helped you like continue to find those authentic parts in you? You know, when we first started our deconstruction journey, you know, somebody was saying, you know, you kind of have to learn, you have to learn who you are. And so even like questions like, what do you like to do? You know, things like that. And those are really things that I had never thought about before. But how do we continue to progress into a deeper sense of authenticity?
I think the hard thing for those who grow up in any kind of a fundamentalist environment, the fundamentalist form of any of the three desert religions, whether it's Christianity, Islam, or Judaism, the locus of control is external.
Right.
It's always external. It was external for your family of origin. It was external for their family of origin.
Yep.
It's been external for generations. And so you really have no way of moving toward an internal locus of control. It's not something you've ever been schooled in doing. And I look at Fowler's Stages of Faith, for instance, and most fundamentalist evangelical Christians would be in stage 3, which is an external locus of control. Stage 5 is returning to usually the faith of your childhood, but in a much broader, much deeper sense. But you can't get to stage 5 without stage 4, which is moving away from the external locus of control and going through a period of disillusionment. And it is a necessary period. I have a friend who calls this period disenchantment. And then the 5th stage, she calls re-enchantment. And I think that's actually quite accurate. But if you're not allowed to become disenchanted with what you have been taught because you are fearful, then you're simply not going to get there. And so I find in my psychotherapy practice, when I work with people coming from an evangelical background, the most difficult thing for them is they don't have a sense of self. They don't have a center, if you will.
Right.
They are almost totally built on the affirmation of others. If they are white males, often they are built on visual signs of success. And of course, you don't have to be an evangelical Christian to be addicted to success here in the United States, particularly for white men. And I find that a lot of folks cannot come to grips with both the core human need or the core human wound. The core human need is built into our DNA for every one of us to want deep human connection. That is a part of the species. And if you think about it, dogs were domesticated 30,000 years ago. So we've watched them evolve along with us. And I think there's a reason they have evolved to love us unconditionally, because they know that is, in fact, our greatest need. The greatest wound, and it's ubiquitous to the species, is that there is something about me that causes me to be unworthy of deep human connection. And of course, it's fed by fundamentalist religion, but I find it true every place on earth. Every counseling client I've ever had is not ever going to get an internal locus of control until they can come to grips with whatever it is that causes them to feel that there's something about them that causes them to be unworthy of deep human connection.
Yeah.
Wow.
So good.
That is powerful.
Yeah. So what was kind of embedded in what you said, that everybody's not going to be happy about you becoming authentic, right? Especially in high control environments like you're talking about. That was true for you, right? Can you talk about some of that?
Oh, absolutely. I think you have to have enough ego strength as opposed to ego need. You know, when we talk about people being egotistical, those are people with a great ego need and not much ego strength. But if you have an adequate ego strength, which means that you do have an unfolding or a core sense of self that you can identify, you are able then to stand alone. You're able to withstand the onslaught. And nobody can take a constant barrage of verbal arrows thrown at them. My first TED Talk has, I believe, last I checked, over 16,000 comments. I have never read any of them. And don't. I never read a single review of my book. I have learned that you've really got to protect your psyche. And lots of people, particularly in the age of the internet, lots of people have no problem whatsoever attacking you with impunity. And you have to protect yourself from that. Yeah. A couple of years ago, I got 15 texts on Thanksgiving morning from evangelical Christians telling me how awful I am and how I'm going to hell. And the fact that they were even able to find my cell phone number, which is not something that's public, and the fact that they coordinated an attack on Thanksgiving morning indicates the ends to which those opposed to the trans community will go.
Right.
And so you really have to develop a strong sense of awareness that you are going to have great losses, that you are going to go through a period where you are in what the hero's journey calls the dark night of the soul. And that you really have to abide there, that you have to learn the things that have to be learned there, that you are completely and utterly lost, but it's okay because lost is a place too. You know, it is in fact Dante's opening words in the Commedia: in the middle of the road of my life, I awoke in a dark wood where the true way was wholly lost. It's Shakespeare's Macbeth. Life is but a tale told by an idiot, full of sound and fury, signifying nothing. You know, we go through that period of being profoundly lost and being alone. David White is a poet and worked in corporate America, and at one point went to work not happy with his job, not happy with himself, stuck his head in a conference room where a meeting was taking place, said loudly to those there, "Has anybody seen David?" And they just looked back incredulously because there was only one David who worked for the company, and it was the man asking the question. And he said he knew right then that it was time for him to separate and go into the dark. And he wrote my favorite poem of his, Sweet Darkness, which identifies that day as it begins. It says, when your eyes are tired, the world is tired also. When your vision has gone, no part of the world can find you. And it's time to go into the dark. It's time to go into the dark where the night as eyes to recognize its own. There you can be sure you are not beyond love. The dark, it'll be your home tonight. The night will give you a horizon further than you can see. And that's the first half of the poem. He didn't write the second half of the poem till much later, after he had come out of that dark night of the soul. And the second half of the poem is this, that you must learn one thing. The world was made to be free in. You must give up all the other worlds except the one to which you belong. Sometimes it takes darkness and the sweet confinement of your aloneness to learn that anything or anyone that does not bring you alive is too small for you. And of course, that's the beauty of the poem, is that last part. Anything or anyone that does not bring you alive is too small for you. So there was, for me, a period of being in this liminal space where I was letting go of one thing and did not yet have another thing onto which I could grasp.
Right.
And it was a very painful couple of years. And I actually experienced it again about almost exactly 2 years ago, and went through another year of great loss and disappointment with myself too. And it was probably a good year, more like 18 months before I really found my way again. And I think if you're answering the call toward authenticity, you're going to find yourself lost more than once. And you have to own it. You have to recognize lost is a place too.
Yeah.
And you have to be willing to spend the time you need to spend there. And often there will be a painful self-realization that is a part of that.
Just listening to you talk about that, just like, I mean, I'm just going to tell you, like, I can feel that in my body. You know, I feel like this anxiety because I've been there, and I know I'm going to be there again. That's kind of scary to think about, really.
It is.
Yeah, because like you said, you have to kind of come to grips with some things about yourself, maybe.
We will all go through between 3 and 5 profound changes in our lives. And we generally won't be able to recognize those until we see them in the rearview mirror. And some we can anticipate, you know, who you marry, what you choose as a career, where to go to college. Some arrive unanticipated.
Right.
And so for me, even the answering the call to transition was anticipated, something I knew from childhood that I had been avoiding for a long time. The one that came 2 years ago was unanticipated, and it was every bit as difficult to go through. It was thrust upon me, and it is, you have the option to run and hide, or to be willing to go on the hero's journey, which will always be under the road of trials.
Yeah. And you don't go on that journey without courage.
No.
Vulnerability.
And I think you also don't generally go on it unless you have to. I mean, I don't know anybody who's willingly answered the call onto the hero's journey, but you reject the call, and now you're miserable because you know you've been called, and you've rejected the call. And this is when your character really comes to bear. And you have a spiritual guide, I think, who comes into your life at this point, a Yoda, if you will. And that person or people give you the courage to answer the call. And then you answer it, and sure enough, it's a road of trials. And it's like, yep, that's why I chose not to answer this first time it came around. It's a road of trials. And then invariably on the hero's journey, as Joseph Campbell defines it, it gets worse. You find yourself in that deep, dark cave where the true way is wholly lost. The place that I called lost is a place too. And you can see nothing. And then finally you see the light at the end of the tunnel. And thank God this time it's not an oncoming train. And you get out of that deep, dark place and you're back on the ordinary road of trials, which now feels like nothing compared to what you just went through. Yeah.
Yeah. So anyone that does not bring you alive is too small.
Is too small for you. Yeah.
You also made reference to the fact that we have a deep need for connection.
Right.
And so one of my issues, shortcomings, whatever it is that I want to be accepted, and connect. I understand connection and acceptance by a group is not the same thing, but we have that deep need for connection. I appreciate what you've said all so far. It's very wise, and I'm writing things down like crazy here. I'm trying to figure out what my question is. There are no shortcuts to that. You're going to have to encounter some people that are too small, and you won't know until you know them. Is that right?
It's absolutely true.
Or am I?
No, I think it's absolutely true. Sometimes it takes darkness and the sweet confinement of your aloneness. You generally won't get there unless you're willing to go there. Sometimes it takes darkness and the sweet confinement of your aloneness to learn that anything or anyone that does not bring you alive is too small for you. And one of the things that I think I had to discover was that I was worthy of more stimulation than I thought, that I was worthy of a different circle of friends than I thought. One of the things evangelicalism does is hold you down, tells you don't get too big for your britches. And my denomination had 7,000 churches, no denominational hierarchy or headquarters, but everybody knew who was in charge. There were 25 or 50 people, and I was one of them. And that group was a self-limiting group. You were allowed to consider the things you're allowed to consider as an evangelical large church pastor or church planting CEO. We were in the catbird seat. That world was too small for me. And it wasn't until I discovered the world of TED that I began to realize, actually, I had been limiting my own growth by not being around people and ideas that truly bring me alive. And so now I coach for TED. I worked with a gentleman last year at TED Vancouver, Manish Bhardwaj, who teaches at both MIT and Princeton, because apparently one of those isn't enough. And, he teaches a course, Moral Clarity for Entrepreneurs, which I know sounds like an oxymoron, but, he's brilliant. And I had to give myself permission to belong there. I speak to the speakers for TEDWomen pretty much every year. And 2 years ago, I was talking about every TED speaker having the imposter syndrome. And then it goes back to that core wound that we all have, that there's something about me that causes me to be unworthy of deep human connection. And oh no, if I get too big for my britches, the world's going to find out I'm a fraud. And so one of the speakers just wouldn't get off of her feeling that she was not qualified to speak. She said, it's not imposter syndrome. I'm an imposter. And I finally stopped her and said, I'm pretty sure you're the only person in the room who just got off the International Space Station and the only one whose husband is on his way there now. And I said, so I'm pretty sure you belong on a TED stage. It's just interesting to me that even some of these brightest, most capable people on earth have that core sense that there's something about them that makes them unworthy.
Yeah.
But for me, it was big to give myself permission to be with those people. It's part of why I go to Wild Goose. I get paid a lot of money to go speak at corporations. We get paid nothing to speak at Goose. And a lot of the reason we go is because we have an opportunity to rub shoulders there with people who are worthy of our level of faith development. And so I should be hanging around with Stan Mitchell and Brian McLaren and Diana Butler Bass and Jim Wallace and Pete Enns and all the other folks that I get to spend time with at Goose. And for me, that is a key part of it, is being able to be with other thinkers who are out there at the cutting edge, either coming up with the ideas, and I don't think that's me, or communicating them, which I do think is me. And you have to give yourself permission to do that. You, of course, did that in choosing to leave that Southern Baptist world and to enter into a world where Goose is a part of it all. It is being willing to leave behind that which is too small for you. And it's not an egotistical statement.
That's what I was going to ask about that.
Right.
Yeah.
No, it is something that comes, I believe, with maturity. If you look at the most mature leaders, I've done a lot of reading recently on the founding fathers, primarily, not as many books on the founding mothers. But I look at George Washington, for instance, and not a lot of the others, not Thomas Jefferson, in my opinion, well, yeah, I don't need to get into all that. But if you look at what sets Washington apart or Lincoln apart, it is that they have equal parts confidence and humility. So, if you sit with all of those speakers at Goose around a table at night and you listen to them, everyone is willing to speak from their knowledge base. But every last one of those people, they wouldn't be at Goose otherwise, does not have a big ego need. They have great ego strength, and they also have a lot of humility. They are willing to recognize what they don't know, and when it's time to be quiet, and when it's time to listen to another. That's what George Washington had that John Adams did not have, that Thomas Jefferson did not have. And I think that's all the great leaders have those equal parts, confidence and humility. And I think not long ago, I thought that was original with me. And then not long ago, I read one of Henry Nouwen's books and found it in that book. So, I think at this point in the history of humanity, there's nothing original out there.
So how do you go from, and I don't know if you have a straightforward answer, or maybe you can just speak from your experience, but like that imposter syndrome, like I really struggle with that. Like I struggle I don't really belong here. I'm here, but I don't really belong here. So how do you work your way out of those feelings? Because sometimes they're very, very strong for me, and it's almost debilitating, And so how do you get to that, place where you feel like, I'm worthy to be here?
Yeah, it's interesting. 100% of humans experience imposter syndrome. You'll see all kinds of studies that will say women experience it 75% more often than men. That's not true. Women are 75% more likely to admit it. And that's because women are allowed to admit that they feel that way. They also are not allowed to be confident. And it's because we teach our daughters they have to be perfect. We teach our sons to be confident. But we teach our daughters if they have any flaw, then they are not capable. And we think we're doing them a service. We say life's going to be harder for you. But, what happens, because we teach them to be perfect. They graduate at the top of their class, but then they get in their first corporate position. The position opens up in the company. It has 5 requirements. A woman has 4 of the 5. And she thinks, there's no way that I can apply for this job because I don't have the 5th. I'm not perfect. And a guy has 2 of the 5. And because he's been taught to be confident, he thinks, I got this, and applies for the job and gets the job, even though he's exactly half as qualified as a woman who did not apply in the first place. And so I think we do make it more difficult for women and make it more likely for them to experience imposter syndrome. But I believe there really are only a couple of ways to deal with the imposter syndrome. One is to stop teaching our daughters to be perfect and teach them to be confident instead. A second is for all of us to recognize nobody goes into a battle with the weapons they need to win the battle. And anybody who tells you they do is lying. Mm-hmm. Everybody takes on a task clueless as to what it's going to take to accomplish that task. They bring with them nothing but their wits and their wisdom, and they have to figure it out in the midst of the battle. Mm-hmm. That's why all the great myths have a hero who spends 3 days and 3 nights in a very dark place and finally wins the battle, not with the tools he took with him into the battle, but with the tools he finds in the midst of the battle. So Beowulf, when he fights the mother of Grendel, finds the tools he takes with him. The king has generously given him the helmet and the sword. They're useless. He finds a sword glowing, attached to a chain to the wall of her lair. And in the middle of the battle, he pulls that sword off of the wall and slays her with it. Well, that's the way it is for all of us. So if we can understand that nobody goes into a task with the tools they need to complete it, everybody in that regard is an imposter. And so it's because the expectation that we have been given is that we have to be absolutely perfect. But the bigger issue in facing the imposter syndrome is twofold. The first part of it is in recognizing that you are worthy of deep human connection. And I think that's where Christianity has done great damage, particularly the doctrine of original sin has done great damage because it teaches we are not worthy of deep human connection. Yeah, that you are worthy of deep human connection. And I believe the evangelical Christianity has heard that. The worst doctrine for that, I think there are two, but the worst is original sin. The second is the substitutionary atonement, that there is something about us that makes God have to punish us eternally unless somehow someone else can make us clean. So the very core teachings of Christianity have mitigated against understanding we are worthy of deep human connection. And I find most people have to deconstruct before they can get there. And I find even people who don't grow up in a fundamentalist environment, it takes a lot of therapy for them to get to the point where they recognize they are worthy of deep human connection. The second piece then is much harder. Well, no, they're equally hard. The second's much more painful. The second is you have to own your abiding shadows. And it's difficult to own your abiding shadows when you don't think you're worthy of love. You believe you will be annihilated if you actually own those parts of yourself that you're not ever going to get a hold of. But if in fact you know you're worthy of deep human connection, you also can own those abiding shadows. James Hollis, the Jungian analyst, calls it existential guilt. He says these are the parts of yourself that gave you trouble at 18, that'll give you trouble at 38 and 88. They are not ever going away. The best you can do is identify them, lock them in the basement. When they escape, catch them as fast as possible before they've done much damage, and lock them in the basement again. And generally, those parts of you are the opposite of your strengths. They're your strengths taken to an extreme. So for me, I actually have a plaque on the wall in my bedroom that says it's all right to have an unexpressed thought, because I will speak when it would be better to have remained silent. Interestingly, I don't do it as a therapist because it would be unethical. But I usually, if I stop and think for a minute, Do I really need to be saying this? And you have to own that part of yourself, because you can't be gracious toward others until you see you got your own stuff you're never going to get a hold of.
Yeah.
But also that stuff doesn't make you unworthy of deep human connection.
Right.
And if you can unloose those shadow sides, you will also unloose your pinnacle gifts. You will be able to embrace that which you are good at as well. And you will be able to own what you know.
That's really good. That is so helpful for me, even like right now. Like I'm starting a new school, new grade level, and I'm going in just like, and I've been a teacher for a long time, but you go in thinking, you know, I can't do this, or like, you know, what do I do? I don't know what to do. And so I love what you said about, you know, when you go into the battle to fight the battle, a lot of times you don't have the weapons that you went in with. And I'm like, it is so good. Like, I'm going to remember that as I start school. Like, it's okay. I'm not going to necessarily have, you know, exactly what I need for this new, you know, and I don't want to call it a battle, but this new endeavor that I'm taking on. But, you know, as I'm going through the process, I will find those things that I need. I really like that.
I really think the key to resilience is actually in that story of Beowulf. Your problem is not that which you fear. Your problem is that which gave birth to the thing you fear. The problem was not Grendel. The problem was the mother of Grendel. And that which gives birth to the thing we fear is that sense that we're not enough. And you have to face that. And Beowulf faces it by going alone down into the deep, dark, cold, forbidding waters where the mother of Grendel lives. And that takes great courage to face that sense that there's something about me that is not enough. And then he recognizes quickly the tools that he takes with him are not going to get the job done. And it also takes him 3 days and 3 nights before he can kill the monster, because it takes 3 days and 3 nights to kill a monster, and sometimes longer, particularly when that monster is a part of you. But then when he finally comes back to the surface, he's alone. The king's gone. His men are gone. He doesn't need them. He is whole in and of himself because he has found that true kind of resilience. And I think it's a tragedy for those of us raised in evangelical Christianity that we were not given those kinds of tools that others are, in fact, given.
That makes me think of what you were talking about, you know, instead of that external locus of control, when you get to that point, you're really tapping into what's inside you.
Right. Yeah.
We talk a lot about dealing with shadow, and we talk about the idea of dealing with those parts of you that have been traumatized, and being with them without judgment and integrating those back into your existence. You know, you can't just squash them, you know, you can't ignore them, but you need to face them, and so lines up with everything you're talking about here. One thing you said you talk about a lot is gender equity. I have a feeling you could talk about that for 3 hours, but maybe if you could help the listeners by pointing them to specific TED Talks and things that you have, and I want to mention your book again and tell people where they can find you and things like that. Can you help us with all of that?
I think my first TED Talk, and I've done 3 that are available online. My first TED Talk in 2017, I've lived as a man, I've lived as a woman. Here is what I've learned. That one, if people go on to TED.com or go on to YouTube, that's the one where I'm alone on stage in a red sweater. not a teal jacket, not with my son. That's the one with the red sweater. That's focused on gender equity. And then my memoir, which is about my journey, 2 chapters of that book are about gender equity and hit, I think, some of the salient points, such as what I say in that first talk. There's no way a well-educated white male can understand how much the culture is tilted in his favor. Mm-hmm. And one of the things I said in my second solo TED Talk is, if there's one single thing I wish I could go back and tell Paul, it would be assume a woman knows what she's talking about and treat her accordingly. Mm-hmm. That alone would make a huge difference in the world.
It's really good.
Unfortunately, I just did the opposite of that earlier today.
There's a lot of not just learning that men receive, but generational learning that comes that just causes men to not know what they don't know.
Mm-hmm.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah.
So how can people get in touch with you if they want to reach out to you, or if you're available for that?
Yeah. If they go to paulastonewilliams.com, there is a link to my website there, or a link to my email there, which is paula@RLT, as in Tom, RLT Pathways, Road Less Traveled Pathways.com. And they can reach me that way, or they can reach me through comment on my at paulastonewilliams.com.
Perfect.
Last question is one I don't ever prepare people for, but we always ask, or usually always ask, if you had a billboard that reached the whole world, and it's close because your TED Talks just about did, but what would you put on your billboard? What would you say to the rest of the world?
The call toward authenticity is sacred and holy and for the greater good.
Mm. We'll do our best to communicate that when we're rolling this out.
Yeah,
and so on. And I've written down a lot of what you said. The poem about if someone.
The poem is called Sweet Darkness.
Okay.
And it's by David Whyte. That's spelled WHYTE, not I. WHYTE.
We got those. More importantly, Laura is writing them down so they'll be preserved. But this has been great and went super fast. I can't believe that an hour passed by that quickly.
Yeah,
I was riveted on everything you said.
So good. So good.
I'm a very poor listener, so you had my attention the whole time. So,
you actually took it in very different directions than most podcasts do, and that was fun.
Good.
Yeah, that took me into new territory that I don't talk about as often, and it was very delightful.
That's great.
It was very meaningful for me.
Yeah.
Good.
So I'm very thankful for your time. Thank you so much for joining us tonight.
Good. Oh, it's my pleasure.
Hopefully we get to do it again. Hopefully we'll be back at the Goose next year, and we get to spend a little more time with you, hopefully. But for the listeners out there, we thank you for joining in. We hope that you can not only listen but that you contribute, that you would join in discussions, start discussions, and we are always here. So as always, we encourage you to be where you are, be who you are, and be at peace.
Thank you for joining us today on the Desert Sanctuary.
Remember, all that wander in the desert are not lost. We hope that you know
you are seen,
you are heard,
and you are loved.